Welcome to another episode of the Theater Podcast, intimate personal conversations with theater's biggest names. I'm Alan Seals.
And I'm Jillian Hockman, producer extraordinaire.
Extraordinaire. Hi, Jillian.
Hello.
This episode is with Jarrod Spector, who's currently starring as Sonny Bono in the Cher Show. And I have to say, is just phenomenal. I can't say enough good things about his performance in this show.
Yeah, he is fantastic. And you two dig deep in this episode.
Oh, yes, we do. We actually ran out of time because we were chatting before he had to run to a show, and we just ran out of time digging into his past, and he actually gets really deep into mental health, which I love. I absolutely love when people are open and comfortable enough to talk about that, because I think so much of us aren't able to.
It's nice to see successful people talking about struggles, and nice to hear that people that we admire go through the same things that we do and have the similar paths or trying to figure out what they want to do. And it's comforting to know you may not be alone in this.
I think so many people in the world really don't either know what they want to do ever in their life, or they kind of think they do, and then they get there and they're like, oh, yeah, this isn't what I thought it would be. And I really enjoy, especially on this podcast, it's kind of come up a couple times, but especially with Jarrod here, we do dive deep that he went to college for finance after making his Broadway debut as a kid, right? And because he thought that's what he wanted to do. And he gets there and just cannot stand it, comes back, still doesn't know what he wants to do after he leaves college. And then, found his way into these amazing character roles that we know him for now. And I applaud him for taking the chance and realizing, listening to his gut and getting over the struggles that he was having internally.
Yeah, and it's okay to change your mind and to say, I'm not cut out for this, or I tried it and it's not for me, and find a different path. And even if you have to float around for a little bit, try everything, be open. And that's what makes you a better actor, a better performer, and a better person. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear through Jarrod Spector that he is a great person and a great performer and just so cute.
Yes, everybody, please enjoy this episode with Jarrod Spector.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
Today's guest made his Broadway debut as Gavroche in the original production of Les Mis and went on to play a record-breaking 1,500 performances as Frankie Valli in Jersey Boys on Broadway. He's been seen on national tours of Les Mis and Jersey Boys and in the off-Broadway productions of Hamlet. He was nominated for both the Tony and Outer Critics Circle Awards for his performance as Barry Mann in Beautiful, the Carole King Musical, and can now be seen in the Cher Show as Sonny Bono. Welcome, Jarrod Spector. Thank you for talking with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alan, for having me, man.
No problem. It's all right. Come on in. Waters have arrived.
Hallelujah.
Thank you.
You need them for these long talks.
That's right.
Thanks.
So you have a show tonight, so we'll get started here. But as we always do on this podcast, we talk about your humble upbringings, your standard beginnings here. Where were you born? What kind of child were you?
I was born at Einstein Hospital in Philadelphia.
So specific.
Well, you wanted humble. Yeah, it was. I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up. My parents had me singing at a really young age. I mean, I guess that's sort of what we're talking about here, right? Is how you start, how I ended up where I am now. So my mother, I'm the youngest of 4 children, but my siblings are much older than My siblings are older than me, 7, 8, and 9 years older than me, which when you're an infant is quite a bit. So I was sort of an only child and also not. I had the best of both worlds. So I spent a lot of time, riding around in the car with my mom, and she noticed that I would learn radio commercials and memorize them. Back in the day when there weren't so many channels and there weren't so many ads, you could actually remember them. And so I used to sing along, and she thought, cute, right? And then she taught me Sunny Side of the Street and Me and My Shadow and Side by Side. She taught me a few songs that we sang for my father, who then was impressed that his 2-year-old could sing. And they took me to a local vocal coach in Philadelphia.
At 2?
At 2.5.
Wow.
Yeah. And that gentleman, his name was Russell Faith, said, he's actually Andrea McCardle's voice coach. And he said, well, there's this local TV show called the Al Alberts Showcase. It was this local variety show in Philadelphia that was on weekend mornings. And he said, go over there and, audition for them. And so we did. And I became a Teeny Bopper was the name of the segment on the show where, children would sing and tell Uncle Al a joke every week then for the next 3.5 years before I went on to Star Search and other things.
Wow. So and Star Search was age 6.
Yes.
And what was the process like to get on that?
I mean, honestly, I can't remember every detail of it, but there was definitely an audition in New York. And then I think that was it. I think it was one or two auditions, but I remember not flying into Los Angeles until I was actually going to be on the show. So I remember that there was an executive producer named Sam Riddle. He was there and he okayed me, and then we sort of got the green light to go to LA. And it's so funny because it actually is it's a pretty significant memory for me, but I can't imagine that it took that long for all of it to happen, because there were some times when they filmed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So this whole thing, I was on for 5 episodes, and then I came back for like the semifinals or whatever, and I lost both times to the same girl, Countess Vaughn, and she was like Whitney Houston in a 10-year-old's body. It really wasn't fair, and I was 6. I just couldn't compete.
6 versus 10, that's a big difference.
It's really big difference.
Yeah.
She had a cannon of a voice. I mean, it wasn't fair. Yeah.
And so then how did you get to New York and making your Broadway debut at age 9 in Les Mis?
Well, I put myself on the train, and no, jokes. Nobody does that, right? Your parents have to, everyone always asks, or your parents, like stage parents, is it like, Mama Rose? It's not like that, but certainly no 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old does it of their own accord from Philadelphia to New York. So yes, my parents took me to New York. I started auditioning when my first audition for Les Misérables was for the tour that came through Philadelphia when I was 7. So that would be like 1998. Excuse me, 1988.
Like,
or 98 if I'm in my fantasy world. 1988, I was 7, and the tour came through when I was just too young. And then a couple years later, same thing happened. The tour of Les Mis was coming through Philly again, and my parents took me to an audition. Now, this one I do remember, it was hell on earth in retrospect. I mean, I don't think I thought it was hell on earth at the time, but as an adult, thinking about walking into like a ballroom in some hotel in Center City, Philly, with however many hundreds of kids and all of their stage parents, like it really is a nightmare. And they give you a number, and they brand you like your cattle, and then they call you in one at a time. And I remember getting through that particular process, and then the callback was in New York, and it was a much smaller group, it was a much smaller room, and it was me and however a dozen other kids or whatever, and their parents. And I was the first one called into the room to audition, and I did my little thing, and then they called my parents into the room, which I think that's unusual. I mean, it certainly is unusual, would be unusual now, but they called my parents in and said, okay, congratulations, Jarrod has the job. Here are 3 tickets. Go enjoy the show tonight.
Just like that?
Just like that. And then as we were about to leave, they said, wait. Do me a favor. Don't celebrate on the way out, because we don't want everyone else to know that the job's already gone. And
what?
I think about that every audition I go on forever. Every time I'm in a room, because it's always possible that they've actually on the spot handed the job to the person right before you, and then that asshole isn't allowed to say anything on the way out, and so you're just standing there and going. I try to have good faith in things, but yeah, that's how that happened.
Oh gosh, that's something that you never shake.
No, never. Even though it was good for me in that moment.
Yeah.
It's it's a scary thing to know.
Oh, geez. Yeah. That makes me not want to ever audition again.
Well, there are many things that would make you not want to audition. Auditioning in general is just asking to be judged. I know there are lots of people, and there are books written about this. How many books about how to enjoy the audition, how to do the audition, and I personally have never quite mastered the mental side of it, of making it feel like a performance opportunity, or, even if you don't get it, you make a good impression. Those are really good motivating things, and you always want to do the best work that you can. And I enjoy analyzing scripts and performing and all those things. So there is some of that, but I don't know how you separate yourself out from the reality that you're asking for a job. and you're either going to get it or you're not. And there might be reasons far outside your control why you get it or don't get it. And yet it's still so hard to shake that very personal feeling. It's just, it's a hard life. Even when you meet with some level of success, it's still a hard life.
Yeah. Because you're putting yourself out there. I mean, it's personal, right? If you connect with your character, if you find the emotional connection, and then all of a sudden you don't get the part. I can understand through personal experience why you're like, oh, am I not good enough because I put myself into that?
Absolutely. The more that you want it, the more that you like it, and the more you do exactly what you're saying, like indulge in this character and dive in. It's the stakes can't help but go up a little bit. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't want to let my imagination run away with the possibility of what it would be like to get this role and do it, and yet. How can I not? How could you not? It's really hard to control that. I mean, that is kind of the art of surviving in this world, is to figure out how to deal with that.
So you got Gavroche.
Yes.
And you were 9. And what was it like for you being a kid on Broadway?
I mean, I definitely didn't know the significance of it. I was a child. I didn't know. It was it was incredibly fun, right? I mean, my costume were actual rags. My makeup was, you burn a cork with a light. First of all, I got to play with a lighter. So you burn a cork with a lighter and rub it on your face. That's makeup when you're Gavroche, and you put like actual grease in your hair and you're good to go. So, and then you get to run around on stage. And like, you're the only kid for the most part. I mean, there are, they're the girls who play Cosette, but during the back half of the show, you're the only kid with a whole bunch of fun-loving actor adults who are, throwing you around, and you run around and get to play with a fake gun. I mean, and then die. I mean, it's just like a dream role. I wish I could play Gavroche now. My voice might be high enough, so that's cool.
The way you describe that, it seems like every kid's like perfect imagination.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah. It's the best. So that part I remember being quite a bit of fun. I mean, I do remember my first moment going on actually is it's very specific because it's right before. I mean, if you know Les Mis, and many people do, it's when Paris comes. It's when Valjean and Cosette disappear, and then they show up in Paris, and you have to sneak on stage in the dark with all this smoke billowing on stage, at least in the production that I was in, and everyone is sort of moaning because they're homeless, they're like beggars on the streets of Paris, and so you have all these people moaning, and I'm like a little kid sneaking on the stage in the dark and covering myself with a blanket with all this smoke, and then having to get up and run down and start singing, to 1,500 people at the Imperial Theater. I mean, it was it's quite an experience that I like viscerally remember, despite the fact that it was 29 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, did you still feel like you had a normal life outside of theater at that point? Or after that, did you want to continue? Did you still audition? I guess, did your parents take you to more auditions, or do you like, I need a middle school experience now?
No, I definitely had a normal life outside of the show. Even I did the show in Philadelphia and in Chicago and on Broadway, and in all those cases. I mean, when I did the show in Philly and in New York, I used to miss Wednesdays because at school because of a matinee. But for the other 4 days of the week, I was at school and I did my normal workload because it was elementary school and how much work actually is there, right? So, and when you're Gavroche, you're only on 4 out of the 8 shows a week. So I was able to actually do homework while I was at the theater. And then when that was over and I sort of grew out of it, because I think the cutoff was like 46 inches. If you're more than 40, so you can't, the Nigel Ross can't pick you up on his shoulder anymore or whatever it is. So you can't be in it for that long. And then I definitely still auditioned for things, but I definitely had a bunch of years there where I was just in school, like normal. And it wasn't until I actually booked this sitcom pilot when I was 14 or 15 years old. And that was the next big thing in my life that sort of took me to this crossroad of what am I going to do? Because I was, we went out to LA and filmed this sitcom pilot that for NBC. It had Peter Boyle, Young Frankenstein, Everybody Loves Raymond. Peter Boyle was the grandfather, and this amazing actor from The Sopranos, Michael Rispoli, was the father. I mean, it was this really cool, and I got to sing and play the piano on the show. It was called The Larsons of Las Vegas. And the father was a professional gambler. And this was about 3 or 4 years before like the Texas Hold'em craze happened in this country. And the feedback, even though the show was quite funny, was ultimately that after we filmed the pilot and test audiences, they didn't like that the father was a gambler. That was the big smack against the show. And I swear, if it had come out 5 years later, it would have been a hit. But it came out, that's when they put up the money for it. And I remember being a kid and getting this call. I was alone at home when I got this call that the pilot wasn't going forward. And meantime, we were supposed to have moved to Los Angeles and this whole new life was going to begin. And my siblings were old enough; they were in college or out of college by then, and we could pick up and move to LA. It was doable. Yeah. And then this happened, and none of it was going. Then this sort of failure of the pilot, none of it was going to happen. And I remember having this moment of being like, I am not mature enough to handle this. I am a little boy, really. I mean, at that in terms of maturity. And
you were 14.
I was 14 or 15. I mean, something like that. I was in the 8th or 9th grade. I was so young, and that was the moment when I said, I don't want to audition anymore. I don't want to go to New York or LA. I don't want to do anything. I just want to be a kid. And
wow.
So that lasted a little while.
Well, I was going to say it didn't last very long because you went to Princeton.
Yeah.
And what degree did you get from Princeton?
Right. So I didn't get a degree from Princeton. Here's what happened.
Tell me the story.
Here's the story. Well, I had this sort of, I had it in my mind that being in this particular industry was a life of uncertainty and pain. I did not have a good relationship with New York. I didn't want to be here. I thought it was loud and dirty and scary and awful. That was the impression I had. I mean, it is, but I didn't love it for those reasons. I hated it for those reasons when I was a kid, and I just didn't want to be here. And Los Angeles was so far away. I wanted to be with my friends, and I wanted, so I worked real hard in school, and I went to Princeton. Now, all throughout this time, I'm still singing. I mean, my voice changed, so I had a moment where I didn't enjoy singing that much because it started to hurt, but then it came back, and I never stopped singing or being in music. I still did the musicals at my school. I just didn't want to do anything professionally. And I certainly, when I was applying to all of these colleges, I still used Broadway and my interest in musicals and the musicals at their particular school as a way to get into the school. But when I went to Princeton, I studied economics. And I took Chinese in my sophomore year. And my idea was I was going to be, and I'd say this with quotes, we can't say like a regular person, which is the dumbest concept. There is no such thing as a regular person, but that's what I thought that I wanted to be, someone not in this industry. And meantime, I was fine in school, but it was just so hard to keep up because I didn't really want to do it. I was sort of staring down the barrel of a life and career that did not interest me. And just because I could get by in the classes and I thought, I could ultimately do this, I guess, if I had my heart in it, it doesn't mean that I should do it.
What did you think your degree was going to be in?
Economics. Yeah. I'd like finance. That was my trajectory. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And meantime, Princeton has this amazing, it's called the Triangle Club. It's like the oldest musical theater group in all of the universities, I believe. And it had like F. Scott Fitzgerald was in it and Brooke Shields. And it was this really cool thing. And I spent all of my time and energy and effort there because that's what I really wanted to do. Meanwhile, I wasn't getting any credit for that. And I was killing myself keeping up with my classes when you're in the school with like, the upper 1% of everyone who's brilliant. And you think you're smart, and then you get there and you're like, well, I'm not that smart. And also they loved it and I didn't. And it was just, it became too much. And I had to leave after 2 years and try to figure out what the hell I was going to do with myself. My parents were understanding. I moved home and I sang for a wedding and bar mitzvah band for a year. Yep.
What was the name of that?
Oh gosh.
I really hope it's a good pun.
Oh God, no! It's oh God.
How about tequila?
Oh, I wish. No, it was called. Oh, I remember. It was called Cutting Edge Orchestras.
Okay.
Yeah. Not
as good as How About
quite.
Tequila.
No, not nearly the dad joke that Have a Tequila would have been. So I did that for a year and trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with myself. And I definitely, I was depressed, and I couldn't. My second semester of my sophomore year at Princeton was not good. I was having this kind of breakdown because my body was telling me one thing and my brain and heart were telling me other things, and I just couldn't. I was like, everything was, the wires got crossed, and I sort of zapped myself because I just was in a place I didn't want to be, doing something I didn't want to do, but I was also living this lie because this other half of me at school was doing this thing that I was very much thriving in, and I just I didn't have the heart to tell my parents that I needed to leave what had just been ranked like the #1 school in the country, whatever the hell. That didn't matter. I didn't care. It's a hard thing to tell your folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time that year at home was a learning experience of trying to figure out what am I going to do. Meanwhile, all my friends are still, are now juniors in college and they're moving on with their lives. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? And that following summer, I moved to New York with my 2 closest friends. And started and fell in love with the city and decided, okay, I'm going to take performance classes and I'll figure out what to do. I'll just take whatever classes and play the piano and, sing and whatever, and I'll figure something out. And that was the best decision I made, was sort of facing my fear of being in this city and doing it with best friends who could make it fun to be here. And take advantage of everything that the city offers in a way that I obviously didn't when I was 9. I hated it so much, and so that was a whole different dynamic. And then it became fun. Then it became exciting, and being here was a joy. And I started auditioning, and that didn't really lead to a whole hell of a lot. But I did end up at a really hardcore theater program at the Atlantic Theater Company.
Theater,
yeah. So I did that. I went there for like 2.5 years because I realized I didn't know how to act. I mean, I just had no training in that area. I could sing because I had always sung and I'd always had lessons, but I didn't know anything about acting technique, not really. And so 2.5 years of that was a whole different thing. And then when I came out of there, of course, I was like, well, now I'm only going to do Chekhov, Ibsen, Shaw, and Shakespeare, and Odets, and I'm not going to. And then, of course, I was cast as Frankie Valli.
That's funny. It was Wesley Taylor too came out of North Carolina School of the Arts. It has a similar story that reminds me of this. That he came out and he was like classically trained in doing Shakespeare, and his Broadway debut was Rock of Ages.
Rock of Ages, right, of course.
Like, yeah, of course, because that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I think everybody, if you're playing a principal, if you're playing a speaking role in a Broadway show, you have to know how to deliver lines. So all of that training comes in handy, irrespective of what you thought you were going to end up doing or how highbrow you thought the scripts were going to be. And you can't reasonably expect to do Chekhov, Ibsen, Shaw, and Shakespeare for the rest of your life, especially if you want to be on Broadway, because it's a lot of musicals and a lot of the great work are musicals. So, and one of my smartest teachers that I really enjoy, like, flex every muscle you have. Don't limit yourself based on some preconceived notion of what you want to do, what you think you can do. Like, try everything. And if you can play an instrument, great. If you can dance, great. If you can act, great. And if you can sing, definitely great. Do all the things. And so, of course, I was expecting to do Shakespeare soliloquies, and instead it was like, "Hey, Tommy, fuck you." That it was a big tangent.
Right. I want to go back to something you said that I was impressed that you said at 14 you had the wherewithal to say, like, man, I'm not equipped to do this. I don't want to do it anymore. And then at 20, I presume 19 or 20, like halfway through college, you're like, all right, this isn't what I want to do. You're emotionally conflicted. It wasn't like, I'm not getting good grades. I just can't do it anymore. But you said you're doing very well. And I personally, I wouldn't have had the maturity to do that. I don't even think I would now.
At 20, you're saying, or at 14?
At 38 right now. but no, at 20, like at 14, definitely, I would have been like, okay, like Broadway, that's kind of cool. I'll give it a shot. And then at 20, I remember I got a computer science degree.
Okay.
And the similar sort of thing. I was just like, well, I'm okay at it. Or I'm great. I'm good. Got good grades. I'm going to do this, and they'll see it out. And then I got my degree, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. So I went through with it.
Yeah.
But no, I'm. That's very impressive that you were like, no, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, I don't want to. Let me revise the story a little bit to something closer to truth. I don't want to. Well, I don't want to mislead you and feel like absolutely. I stood up and I told my parents this, that, and the other thing. What happened was that I was falling apart emotionally. I think, when I was 14, I did have that sort of revelation that I was mature enough to know that I was too immature to handle it, right? So I wasn't, I was, in some ways I was advanced, but in other ways I was behind. So I guess I could sort of recognize that. And then that second half of my sophomore year at Princeton, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, especially, middle school, high school, whatever, you do your work because you're told. Mm-hmm. These are your classes, you take them, you do your best that you can. And I sort of always had that reservoir of, okay, they told me to, so I'll do it. And that ran out for me in the middle of sophomore year. I mean, it was a combination of getting closer to real life and being like, well, what am I actually doing? Like, how do these classes, this isn't English now, right? These are supposed to be professional application classes that I'm taking to get toward my actual real life. It's not, the liberal arts education that you get in high school. So it wasn't so much just for fun. Not that high school is for fun, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you sort of just do it, you get an education.
Mm-hmm.
And this felt very much like I was headed towards something, and I just fell apart, and there were days where I could not get out of bed and I couldn't go to class. So it wasn't as simple as I made the decision and told my parents. It was really hard. I mean, it was very much a breakdown. I mean, I got caught for all intents and purposes by my parents after sort of eluding this truth for a long time. I remember, this is a real confession, but I remember like a letter coming from Princeton, like sort of giving my parents a heads up that something was going on. And I made sure I was home to take it out of the mail and make sure that they didn't get it.
Oh.
And, I was not an idiot. I was deceptive, but it was also that just made the whole thing so much harder, living this sort of duality. I mean, my girlfriend at the time, she did the best that she could with me, but she wasn't emotionally equipped to handle what I was going through. And so that fell apart too. And when you're in high school, you're in some relationship from 16 to 20, it's like your whole world, and that was falling apart too. It's just all these things kind of fell apart all at once until I was, a bit of a puddle, which is I had to go home. I mean, I could have gone back to school.
Mm-hmm.
There was absolutely a path for me to go, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast now, and I feel like a requirement to being a lead on Broadway is to have some sort of having dealt with depression or some sort of emotional breakdown at some point.
Oh yeah,
there are so many people, and I mean, I feel like I'm repeating myself every time. This comes up a lot in these interviews, in these podcasts, and there's people that they just have they're more in touch with their own emotional state, and I guess that's what I was trying to say earlier. Is I was not, me personally, like I was not aware of myself enough to know, like, you know what, this is tearing me apart on the inside, but like I'm covering it up, but I'm far enough away from it that it's not bothering me. Whereas someone with your talent and your ability to connect with a character and your ability to express yourself and your ability to really bring true acting out, the truly successful, great people, you by default, you are dealing with your emotions at a deeper level than most people are.
See, what's funny about what you just said is it seems like you're the one who has the skill, though. That ability to separate out, okay, this is what I have to do, even though that's how I feel, and I'm just going to sort of put my head down and continue, is a skill in and of itself that I guess I had for a while, but in that moment, I no longer could. Like, that is what drove me crazy.
Man.
It's that split, and I couldn't do it anymore, the thing that you're talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and literally, I'm looking away, I'm getting very inside my head right now. Like, you just blew my mind.
No, I don't.
Grass is always greener. Like, Jesus, I am. It's the same thing that I've gone through in the rejection and wanting to be good enough. And so, I guess for fear of being rejected and not being good enough, I never allow myself to connect at a deep enough level to be good enough. So I'm just okay sabotaging myself.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it sure does. It's funny that, yes, I think that you don't have to have an emotional break to be in this business, but it is funny. I went to the Atlantic Theater Company, which was founded by David Mamet and William H. Macy.
Yeah.
And I remember Mamet coming. They would come back and teach master classes every now and again. As you can imagine, like, William Macy was the nicest guy. Oh man, he was inspiring and lovely. And and that's not to say that Mamet wasn't, just in a very different way. Mamet's brain is genius. He would come up with, if you studied any of these methods, your actions and things, and you sort of have to analyze a scene, and his ability to break down a scene and put into his very specific language and a way that you can connect to it, it is unparalleled and uncanny. But he also said something like, yeah, if none of you had fucked up childhoods, you're not going to make it. Like, it's just not going to be interesting to watch. And you're like, oh shit, well, I had nice parents. Does that mean I should just leave?
I had no pain to get in touch with.
I know, I had no pain. I mean, I had my sort of late childhood, quote, pain, but I didn't have a fucked up childhood, I guess. So I created one for myself when I was a little older.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm glad, and thank you for talking about that. I know, like, a lot of people don't like talking about mental health, especially.
I mean, there's no shame in it. I don't,
There shouldn't be.
I was 18, 19, 20. Like, if anyone thinks less of me or anybody else for going through it, when anybody goes through, frankly, at any age, but certainly when you're a kid and unprepared for it, go fuck yourself, because life is hard. And it's not what happens to you. It's the way that you deal with it, I think, and being honest with yourself, finding help, finding a way out of it, and then figuring out a way to not let it happen again, learning the tools to not let it happen again. And when I feel anything, if I ever again felt anything like that creeping up, I would be aware of it. I would be ready for it. So, there's no shame in any of it. I don't think. There certainly shouldn't be.
I don't think anymore. I used to think, because my parents didn't talk about it. They still kind of don't, especially my mother shies away from anything real.
Yeah.
And so, I'm working on that with her. So, Mom, if you're listening, let's talk. So let's get back to shows, huh? Jersey Boys.
Yes.
Jersey Boys, 1,500 performances, over 6 years. That's incredible. What kept you going with Frankie Valli for so long?
A couple things. I started the show on the road. Not on the road. I did the show in San Francisco for a year. So the carrot was what's the next thing. And then they gave me the Chicago company. So I went from one place to the other, and then I did the show there for a year. And then the carrot while I was in Chicago was Broadway. Then I got to Broadway. And then why do you stay? Well, it was the recession. Every show on Broadway was, a lot of them were closing. Just things couldn't last, right? I remember when Hairspray closed while I was in Jersey Boys. Big shows were closing, let alone new ones that just couldn't hang on. Mm-hmm. And I remember, if you pay attention to the Broadway box office grosses, it's actually the biggest shows actually made more money or stayed at 100% because anyone who was going to spend the money was going to do the sure bet, like Wicked and Lion King and Jersey Boys, sort of the mainstays. And, I was looking around at people who were struggling for jobs, and I was in my late 20s and making good money. I was I'm going to leave this. I wasn't going to leave for no reason, and I was petrified to leave and be completely unemployed. I also, just for what it's worth, I went in for things and I just didn't book them for, one reason or another. And I think that's part of the thing is you do something for a long time, and if it's very specific, then people assume that's the thing that you do. That's the thing that you are. That snapshot they get of you in those couple of hours, that's all that you are. That encompasses all of your talent. And so that was, I've certainly fought against that in pretty much every role I've ever done. Because I remember when I was in Jersey Boys, every time I would go into any room, it was, well, he's too Frankie Valli, he's too Italian, he's too dark, he's too whatever, too Jersey, whatever. And then I did Barry Mann, who is also a Northeast city musician, but, Jewish and neurotic and funny. And then he's, well, it's too funny, it's too light, it's too Jewish. And you're like, dude, I can't, whatever you do, you can't win. Because everyone just assumes that that's the thing, that whatever the last thing you did, that's what you are. And that's, that's just a reality that you often have to deal with if you're not, Brad Pitt.
Right. Which neither of us are.
Right.
So beautiful the musical, Barry Mann, Jersey Boys, Frankie Valli, now Sonny Bono in the Cher Show.
Yeah.
How did you get connected with Cher Show? How did you get this role?
So a little over 3 years ago, my wife, Kelly Barrett, and I did a show at 54 Below about musical married couples. It was while I was in Beautiful because, we were listening to Carole King and her, and the story of her and Jerry Goff and her ex-husband, and Barry Mann, who I played, and his wife, Cynthia Weil, who are still together. And it was this wonderful, they made it, but they didn't. And so we looked at all these other couples and we sort of did a whole show about it. And of course, Sonny and Cher. And so I listened, my wife we're very thorough, and we watched, of course, every single possible episode of the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour.
Yeah.
So every one of their openings, where they come in and do a little song, and then they do their little spiel with their dialogue and their very specific rhythms and cadences, and their dynamic, and then they end with a song. And so we watched all of them. And then a year later, I got a call from my agent that I had an offer to do a reading of a new musical about Cher. The writer was Rick Ellis, who was the same writer of Jersey Boys. That's how, in my mind, I'm assuming I was brought into this project. And then, when you're in a project like that from the beginning and it's a reading, your audition, for all intents and purposes, is the reading itself. So thankfully, I was okayed at the end of those couple of weeks by Cher herself, and I was able to stay with the project going forward. But that's how I got into it. But it was great because when I first got the offer, I was like, well, man, I've done so much of this work already. Just kind of for fun. And so now here we are. I got the script and I was kind of ready to go.
So you met Cher for the first time during the readings?
I didn't meet her. So we did this reading. It's just, normal stuff at music stands in a rehearsal room, just a piano and a drum set. At the end of the 2 weeks, we did a presentation, and the whole purpose of it was to do for Cher. But, Cher is very specific. She needs very specific circumstances. As someone who's not of the theater world, I think what our lead team did something very smart, which is they put it in an actual theater. Even that part, even something as basic as a reading, they did in a theater at the Duke Theater on 42nd. So it was in a theater proper with lights and stadium seating, and she sat all the way in the back. They snuck her in just before we started with, she had glasses on and the hat. She was surrounded by her people, and she's literally underneath the spotlight, so we couldn't see her at all. And at the end of it, they whisked her out, right? Just as we had finished. And then later, within a day or two, I got the call that she actually had liked it, and that then it was going to move forward. And they gave me some preliminary dates of what was going to happen. But I didn't actually meet her for a while, because a year and a half later in Chicago is when I actually met her.
So Chicago was last summer,
yes,
right?
this past summer. Yeah.
So you were workshopping. You did the reading
in January 2017.
2017. Yeah. So this actually got to Broadway relatively quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of when they started doing this kind of proper work. I mean, I know one of our producers, Flody Suarez, has been working on this for many, many years, trying to actually make it happen. But from the moment we did the first reading to now, actually, that's pretty quick.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Cher, I think, is famously known for being very critical of her own work, and especially of this show. She was there. I think there was an article saying that she was not happy with a preview, but the show came out extremely well. I loved it. I saw
good.
It.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely loved it.
Thank
when
you.
you started singing, all the people around me were like, what's going on? Like, this guy, he is Sonny Bono. It was incredible. Like the murmurs that proliferated throughout the audience when you started singing the first time were incredible. I loved experiencing it. But the greatest review, I think you know what I'm getting into, a tweet from Cher herself.
Oh,
Do you remember this?
Yeah, if you read it.
Yeah. No, this will sound strange, but because we all worked so hard to bring him back for the play, he doesn't seem gone. Our life is there on stage. From the first second I saw him, it can make me cry, but can also make me so happy. Jarrod Spector is so like him, all caps. Hard to explain. I can see him. How did that make you feel when you read that?
That was on the anniversary of his death.
Ooh.
And when she wrote it, I mean, I remember I was like, scrolling on Twitter, and I follow Cher because she's hilarious and awesome. And I like stopped in the middle of, I was like, I was sitting with my wife, and I'm like, babe, I had to like read it a couple. I was like, you're not going to believe what this says. You have to look at this. And it was, it was very surreal because we actually had just met Chaz the day before. That day we had met Chaz that day because he came on the anniversary of Sonny's death. I'm not even sure if that was intentional or that's just happened to be the day that he was in town. But he saw it, and then, she wrote that tweet, and it was all happened very quickly. And she's been really wonderful to me since I've met her. The moment, she walked into a rehearsal room in Chicago with the whole company, and she's Cher. She's just got this thing. I mean, sometimes you meet a celebrity and you don't quite understand why they're famous, but she's not that person. She is, you sort of get it right away that she's got whatever that thing is, she's got it. And she changes the molecules, she changes the energy. And then, it doesn't hurt that she's always like dressed like a badass, and she's, it's amazing. And, but she hugged all of us, and she hugged me, and she pointed me, "Are you Sonny?" And we held each other. And, she hasn't seen Sonny in 20 years. And this is one of the most impactful people in her whole, in the entirety of her life. And so to represent that in some very small way for them, for her is an honor that I cherish and take very seriously.
Yeah. I hope she likes it, because whenever anyone asks me what to see, I'm like, Cher Show,
yes.
The Prom. I go down my list, but yeah, it's incredible. I love the show.
Thank you. And that moment's really cool. I mean, it's well set up. I mean, it's a Rick Ellis special, because he and Marshall Brickman, who wrote Jersey Boys, did the same thing in that show. I feel like you wait like 40 minutes to hear Sherry, and by the time those chords come in, everyone's going bananas. And by the time you hear Sherry, everyone just goes crazy. And this is kind of the same thing. You want to hear "I Got You, Babe." If you're going to see a musical about Cher, you've got to hear "I Got You, Babe." And then by the time it comes and everyone just can't wait for it, I think they want to jump in and they want to be on board that we are Sonny and Cher in that moment for the very first time that they sang it on TV in the Top of the Pops. You know?
And some of the costumes are actually Sonny's actual shirts, right?
Yeah, we had, there was sort of a hole in my wardrobe. They had added, as things get tweaked, and they were like, okay, we need a new costume, we need a new shirt here. And inimitable Bob Mackie did the thing that he does that only he would be able to do, which is be like, you know what, I'm going to call and have him send one of Sonny's shirts, which they did, and then sort of retrofit it on me because we're slightly different build. But it's amazing to wear his actual shirt. I have a little piece of Sonny on stage at night.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you with all your acting training, do you find that you're approaching roles like Frankie Valli and Sonny Bono and Barry Mann, like, oh, they're all real people?
Yeah.
So, but you're originating a role on Broadway based on real people. So,
right.
Do you get trained for that, or how's that process kind of differ from a standard character?
Well, I mean, I think the beginnings of it are always the same, right? It's like you look at the script and you break it down. However, if you're a Joseph Campbell, and you're like, okay, what is the who is the protagonist, and where does the hero's journey and all that stuff, and how do I fit? Am I the antagonist, protagonist? Am I neither? Am I both? Am I some combination of whatever? And then it's the next step is like making character choices, is where this really is hugely important, because a lot of those decisions are made for you. You can't decide, okay, it's Sonny Bono, so I'm gonna play him with a British accent. Like, that's not an option. Like, he is a real person that people are going to come to the theater and they have a certain expectation. So a lot of your, especially external character choices, are made for you. And then the more you research the person like him, you find out things about him. And then Cher tells you little things about him. I remember she said something like, I don't know if he'd love every minute of the show, but I know he'd be so happy to be represented up there. And to me, that's very character revelatory, right? I mean, that's something about him that you can say, okay, I'm a little closer to understanding that person. And that sort of then informs tactical choices and the way that he feels about certain things. I mean, there's a line in the show that's pulled directly from her eulogy that's, Sonny had the confidence to be the butt of the joke because he created the joke. Now, that is so specific. I mean, I know I do not have that kind of confidence. And I talk about this line a lot because I think it's the thing. This is the crux of this guy, that he knew what to do. He knew like how to make things work, and he didn't care, even if it was humiliating on some level, to go out on stage in front of the entire world with your wife, your goddess warrior, rock star beauty wife, who's going to make fun of your height and your ethnicity and your mother and your mustache and your garlic bread, like every single week. I don't know who would want to do that, but he did. He knew that it was going to work, and it did, and so he kept doing it. So those kinds of things then go into the way that for me, analyze scenes and make choices. And then, of course, look, people are coming in, and especially if it's someone as visually and aurally famous as Frankie Valli, Sonny Bono, you have to fulfill the audience's expectations of who that is, right? I mean, at least to a certain extent. There are moments in the show that I knew had to be nailed, and I Got You, Babe is one of them, right? I mean, he has to sound like, if it doesn't sound like the record, it's, the whole moment is lost. So there were a couple of moments in the show that I was like, okay, you have to be able to get that. And there was something about, my wife really helped me with this too, is I'm a sort of forward-leaning, high energy Northeast Jew. And Sonny Bono is a very laid back Southern California, born in the Midwest Italian guy. And our bodies are different, and our tempos are different, and the way we hold ourselves and carry ourselves. So finding that was a whole other thing too. And again, if it weren't, it's a very, let's say Sonny was fictitious, it's a totally legitimate choice to do him the way he actually is in real life. Or maybe it's totally fair to do him to have his energy be very much like mine, or something entirely different. But because he's real, you have to do that with his very noodly arms, and the way he sits, and the way he sits back, and the way he moves, the way he speaks, and he's just got a slightly slower tempo than me, and all of that stuff has to be in there. And it's the same with Frankie Valli. You can't be like, I'm going to play Frankie, but with a limp. That's not like a thing. You have to do him the way he is, because the audience comes in and they want to hear Sherry and Can't Take My Eyes Off of You with that cry and that rock growl and that ear-piercing, glass-shattering falsetto that he has. And if you can't do those things, and you're not only not doing the show justice, but you're not doing this very real person justice, who is alive in that particular case and is going to come and tell you, you don't sound like me.
Yeah. Gosh, I want to keep talking to you for so long, but you have to get to a show here. We're running short on time. So I want to plug real quick. You've got a show coming up on April 15th at Sony Hall, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, called Con Artists.
Yeah.
So everyone, where can we get tickets for that?
Oh, I think if you just go to Sony Hall, the Sony Hall's website, and or you can go to any of my social media pages on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and I have links for tickets on all of them.
Oh, great.
And this show is a lot about what we're talking about. I've been trained to imitate people since I was a kid. My parents had me pretending to be Bobby Darin on Star Search when I was 6, and they also wanted me to be Barry Manilow because that was their favorite singer. And then, I got a little older, and I wanted to be Billy Joel. And I've always, my whole life has just been trying to be these other people. Whether I cast myself in them or my parents or an actual person on Broadway.
Great. Well, I hope I'll see you on the 15th, April 15th. So we have 3 questions here that I always ask people as closing standards. Very simply, what motivates you?
My wife. Doing the best work that I can to make her proud, truly. Wow, I didn't even think that just came out, but it really is true. I think she's like the most talented person I've ever known, and she has really high standards. And if I can do good work, if I can do work that she thinks is good, then I know I'm doing it right.
That's great. What advice would you give to your younger self and younger people listening now starting out down a similar path?
Ooh, yeah. I would say that if it's easy to follow, oh goodness, I'm always conflicted because people ask this, right? What do you tell yourself, or what would you tell my kid who wants to be on Broadway? My kid wants to blah 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 blah, and I'd be a hypocrite if I said, well, make sure they finish school, because I didn't, but make sure they finish school. Make sure you get an education in some capacity. I guess I could have told myself to maybe go to NYU or go to an acting program instead of to Princeton and try to pretend I'm somebody that I'm not, because you can always make a career change, but at least I would have maybe enjoyed my life a little more if I had, been indulging in the thing that I had in my heart. Mm-hmm. It's a really difficult business. It's a really difficult life, even when you meet with success. So create your own work and find a way to have that emotional armor. Find a way to create self-worth and self-love outside of other people's approval, which usually means success in terms of being cast in things, because God, there are endless reasons why you won't get a role. Endless. And the reason you do get a role might be also completely out of your control. So like letting your heart and your emotional well-being depend on that is not healthy. So finding a way to be happy outside of this industry, outside of even if it's your primary career, is critical.
I love that. And last question here. If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you could see it as many times as you want, what show would you see?
Hamilton.
That's 2 for
I'm
Hamilton.
Sorry. Yeah, I can't. It really does everything. There are lots of shows that I could say. I think my parents would probably say Les Misérables, and not just because I was in it, but that's just so sad for so long. Hamilton is fun and exciting, and then it's sad and it's emotional and it's cathartic, and the music's badass. I know, that might be trite, but I can't think of something I'd want to see more.
There you go. I agree. Okay, so we can find you on Twitter and Instagram at Jarrod Spector, and Facebook.com/Jarrod.Spector. And of course, your solo records, Minor Fall and Major Lift and A Little Help from My Friends are both out. You have your Con Artist show coming up in Sony Hall April 15th. Get your tickets now. If you want more of me in the Theater Podcast, you can find me Theater_podcast, also on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook.com/Official Theater Podcast. You can write me feedback at thetheaterpodcast.com.
Write a feedback.
Yeah, give me some feedback. Rate, review, share the word, share the podcast. This is produced by Jillian Hockman, and of course the music you hear right now, Jukebox the Ghost, friends of ours that are giving us wonderful license to use this wonderful music. Thank you guys, and Jarrod, again, thank you. This has been so wonderful.
Oh man, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.